They sealed these gates for 1,000 years because they feared what would happen when they finally opened again. Emily Carter had heard the old legend since she was a little girl sweeping the quiet stone floors of the Moon Temple, but every elder dismissed it as a story meant to keep curious children away from the forbidden mountains beyond the empire. No traveler claimed to have seen the ancient Wolf Temple with their own eyes, and no map dared to mark its true location. It had become a myth whispered beside fireplaces during winter nights, a forgotten promise buried beneath generations of silence. Yet on the night the blood moon climbed above the endless forest, every story suddenly became real. The wind changed first. It carried a low hum unlike anything Emily had ever heard, as though thousands of distant voices were singing beneath the earth. She paused while carrying a basket of fresh white lilies toward the temple altar. Even the birds stopped singing. Every candle inside the sanctuary flickered at the same moment before their flames stretched toward the northern mountains. The elderly priest who had served the temple for nearly 60 years slowly lowered the ancient prayer book from his hands. His face turned pale as he stared through the stained glass window. High above the forest, a narrow beam of silver light pierced the crimson sky. The ground trembled so gently that only those standing barefoot could feel it. Emily looked toward the distant peaks, and for one brief heartbeat, she thought she saw enormous stone doors glowing beneath the moonlight. Then the sound arrived. A single ancient bell echoed across the empire. Deep, clear, timeless. Every village heard it. Every wolf lifted its head. Every heart seemed to pause between one breath and the next. Far inside Blackstone Citadel, King Alpha Nathan Blackwood immediately rose from the council chamber before anyone spoke a word. He recognized the sound from the oldest royal records his ancestors had preserved but never fully understood. Without hesitation, he ordered Captain Daniel Brooks to prepare the royal guard. Within minutes, riders raced through the palace gates beneath fluttering banners while nobles gathered along the balconies, watching the northern horizon glow with impossible silver light. Meanwhile, Emily found herself walking toward the temple courtyard without remembering taking the first step. Something invisible gently pulled her forward, not with force but with quiet certainty. She stopped beside the ancient wolf statue, standing at the entrance to the sanctuary. For centuries its stone eyes had remained cold and lifeless. Tonight they shimmered with soft silver light. Emily slowly reached out and rested her fingertips against the weathered stone. Instantly the glow spread through every carved line across the statue before racing toward the mountains like a living stream of moonlight. At that exact moment, another bell echoed across the night, louder than before. Far beyond the forest, hidden beneath towering cliffs untouched by time, the colossal gates of the ancient Wolf Temple slowly began to open for the first time in 1,000 years, and although no one inside the empire understood why, the temple itself had already chosen the first person it wished to welcome home. Morning arrived, but no one spoke of ordinary things. Across every village, every marketplace, and every royal corridor, conversations revolved around the same impossible event. The ancient bell had sounded twice, and the northern mountains continued to glow with a pale silver light that refused to disappear even after the blood moon faded beyond the horizon. Emily Carter stood quietly outside the Moon Temple, holding an empty basket that she had forgotten to return inside. Her thoughts remained fixed on the stone wolf whose lifeless eyes had awakened beneath her fingertips only hours earlier. She wanted to believe exhaustion had created the illusion, yet every elder in the temple wore the same expression of quiet disbelief. The oldest priest slowly approached her carrying a faded scroll sealed with cracked silver wax. His hands trembled as he carefully unrolled the brittle parchment. The drawing upon it showed a mountain temple surrounded by towering wolves carved from stone. Beneath the image, a single sentence had survived the passing centuries. When the silent gates awaken, the first soul they recognize shall not arrive by power, but by purity. The old priest looked at Emily for a long moment before gently rolling the scroll closed again. He did not accuse her of anything. He simply seemed unable to ignore what his own eyes had witnessed the previous night. Far away, King Alpha Nathan Blackwood and the royal guard reached the edge of the forbidden forest shortly after sunrise. Hundreds of towering pine trees stood perfectly still despite the morning breeze sweeping across the valley. Captain Daniel Brooks carefully examined the ground. There were no fresh footprints, no broken branches, and no signs that anyone had entered before them. Yet ahead, beyond the final line of ancient trees, enormous stone gates stood open beneath towering cliffs exactly as the oldest royal records had described. Nathan slowly stepped forward until he reached the weathered entrance. Strange silver symbols glowed faintly across the stone, brighter than any natural reflection. Every guard instinctively followed him. But the moment Nathan crossed the invisible boundary before the gate, the silver light dimmed. Another step, and the heavy doors began closing with a deep rumble that echoed through the valley. Nathan immediately stopped. The movement ceased. The gates remained half open. He studied the entrance carefully before taking another cautious step. Once again, the temple rejected him, slowly closing itself as though politely refusing his presence. Nathan stepped backward. The gates opened again. Silence settled across the valley. None of the guards understood what they had just witnessed. Nathan did not speak for several moments. Then he quietly said, "This place is waiting for someone else." At nearly the same instant, Emily felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through the silver pendant hanging around her neck, a simple keepsake left to her by parents she had never known. The tiny crescent carved into its surface shimmered softly for the first time in her life. She instinctively held it close, and a quiet whisper drifted through her thoughts, so gentle she could barely hear it. It did not command. It did not threaten. It simply invited. Before the feeling disappeared, Emily saw a single image inside her mind. The same open stone gates standing beneath endless cliffs, waiting patiently beneath the morning sky, as though the forgotten sanctuary had recognized her long before she had ever learned its name. Emily Carter could not explain why the path through the northern forest felt familiar, even though she had never traveled beyond the quiet valleys surrounding the Moon Temple. The silver pendant resting against her heart grew warmer with every mile, as though it recognized each ancient stone hidden beneath moss and wildflowers. Beside her walked the elderly priest, whose worried silence revealed far more than words ever could. A small group of temple guardians accompanied them at a respectful distance, while far ahead, King Alpha Nathan Blackwood and Captain Daniel Brooks continued waiting before the enormous stone gates. No one had crossed the invisible boundary since sunrise. Every attempt had ended the same way. The ancient entrance quietly rejected every visitor before allowing them another step. Nathan studied the weathered carvings covering the towering walls. Wolves, moons, and unfamiliar symbols stretched toward the sky, their surfaces untouched by time despite centuries of wind and rain. The oldest royal records had described the sanctuary as a place built before the first Alpha King united the empire, yet no document explained who had created it or why it had disappeared from history. The mystery had only grown deeper with every passing hour. Then Captain Brooks looked toward the forest trail and quietly lowered his hand from the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "Someone is coming," he said. Every guard turned at once. Emily slowly emerged from the trees carrying nothing except the silver pendant beneath her white dress. She stopped several yards away, uncertain whether she belonged among soldiers and nobles. Nathan immediately noticed the mixture of hesitation and quiet determination reflected in her silver eyes. She did not resemble someone seeking glory. She looked like someone following a promise she barely understood herself. The moment Emily stepped toward the ancient entrance, the silver symbols across the stone walls awakened once again. Soft light flowed through every carved line before spreading across the massive gates like moonlight dancing upon calm water. The guards instinctively stepped backward. Nathan remained still, carefully watching every detail unfold. Emily hesitated only briefly before placing her fingertips against the weathered stone. Instead of resisting her touch, the temple answered with a gentle chime that echoed through the valley. The heavy doors opened wider than before without a single sound of strain. Warm silver light poured from the darkness inside, revealing an enormous corridor lined with towering wolf statues whose crystal eyes slowly awakened one after another. No voice welcomed her. No spirit appeared. Yet the entire sanctuary seemed to breathe for the first time in 1,000 years. Emily slowly lowered her hand, overwhelmed by the impossible sight before her. Nathan cautiously approached the threshold but stopped several feet behind her. The moment he reached the invisible boundary, the glowing corridor remained unchanged. This time the temple did not reject him. Instead, it simply waited for Emily to take the first step. She looked back at Nathan with uncertainty. "I do not know why this is happening," she whispered honestly. Nathan answered with calm respect instead of authority. "Neither do I. But whatever this place has been waiting for, it chose you before it chose any king." Emily turned toward the glowing passage once more. Taking a slow breath, she crossed the threshold. Instantly, every statue inside the sanctuary lowered its head in silent acknowledgement, and somewhere deep within the forgotten halls, another ancient bell rang only once, as though the first chapter of a promise buried for 1,000 years had finally begun. Emily Carter stepped deeper into the silent corridor, and with every quiet footstep the silver light gently followed her instead of shining from the walls. It was as though the temple itself had awakened simply to guide her forward. Behind her, King Alpha Nathan Blackwood remained only a few feet away, careful not to disturb whatever ancient order governed the forgotten sanctuary. Captain Daniel Brooks and the temple guardians waited respectfully near the entrance, unwilling to challenge a mystery older than the empire itself. The air inside carried neither dust nor decay. Instead, it smelled faintly of pine, rain, and fresh mountain stone, as though time had never touched the sacred halls. Towering wolf statues lined both sides of the passage, each carved from luminous white marble with astonishing detail. Their crystal eyes remained fixed upon Emily, not with judgment, but with quiet recognition. She could almost believe they had been waiting for someone to return. As the corridor gradually widened into an immense, circular chamber, everyone paused in silent amazement. The ceiling disappeared high above into darkness where countless tiny silver lights shimmered like stars trapped beneath the mountain. Around the room stood 12 enormous stone pillars, each engraved with scenes from an age no historian had ever described. Emily slowly approached the nearest pillar. The carvings showed wolves and humans standing side by side beneath the same moon, building cities together instead of ruling one another. She gently brushed her fingertips across the ancient surface. Instantly, the stone glowed with soft silver light, and the carved figures began moving like living memories preserved inside the rock. Nathan watched with astonishment as peaceful villages, flourishing forests, and smiling families appeared before them in shimmering images. There were no battles, no conquerors, only unity. The elderly priest quietly whispered, "Everything we were taught about the beginning of the empire may be incomplete." Emily continued walking through the chamber until she reached its exact center. There rested a magnificent stone pedestal unlike anything else inside the sanctuary. Upon it lay an ancient book bound in pale silver leather that looked untouched despite the passing of 1,000 years. There was no dust upon its cover, no sign of age. Only a single crescent moon embossed across its surface beside the image of a white wolf. Nathan cautiously observed from several feet away. He instinctively knew this was not an object to claim through authority. Emily looked back at him uncertainly. He simply nodded once, silently placing his trust in her judgment. Taking a slow breath, she carefully placed both hands upon the ancient cover. The book opened by itself. Every page turned without wind until it stopped at an illustration unlike any she had ever seen. It depicted a young woman standing beneath a silver moon while an alpha king knelt beside her, not in surrender, but in respect. The woman's face remained unfinished, as though history had been waiting for someone to complete it. Before Emily could speak, gentle silver light rose from the open pages and spread across the chamber ceiling. One by one, every glowing star above arranged itself into the shape of an enormous wolf watching over the sanctuary. Then a calm voice echoed softly throughout the temple, ancient yet welcoming. "The forgotten heart has returned. The final chapter may now begin." No one saw who had spoken, yet every person standing inside the sacred chamber understood that the temple had not simply remembered its past. It had just recognized the future. Emily Carter remained motionless as the gentle voice faded into silence, yet the chamber around her continued glowing with quiet life. The unfinished face upon the ancient illustration slowly shimmered before returning to stillness, as though the temple had revealed only as much as it wished for this moment. King Alpha Nathan Blackwood stepped closer, his silver eyes fixed upon the open pages. Every lesson he had studied about the empire suddenly felt incomplete. The oldest chronicles had celebrated strength, conquest, and royal bloodlines, yet everything surrounding them told a different story. Here, greatness had never belonged to power alone. It belonged to those who could protect hope when fear tempted others to surrender it. Before anyone spoke again, the 12 stone pillars surrounding the chamber began glowing one after another. Soft streams of silver light traveled across the carved scenes until they gathered above the ancient pedestal. Slowly, the light took the shape of an elderly wolf unlike any living creature. Its fur shimmered like moonlight upon fresh snow, and its calm golden eyes carried the quiet wisdom of countless generations. No one reached for a weapon. No one moved. The peaceful presence filling the chamber inspired reverence rather than fear. The radiant guardian looked first toward Nathan, then toward the elderly priest, before finally resting its gaze upon Emily. For 1,000 years, the gentle voice echoed once more. Many sought this sanctuary believing it protected unmatched power. They misunderstood its purpose. Emily lowered her eyes respectfully. Then why was it hidden? She asked softly. The guardian smiled with quiet kindness. Because hearts ruled by pride would have turned memory into possession. This place was never built to reward the strongest. It was built to remember the truest. Those words settled deeply inside every listener. Nathan slowly removed the ceremonial pendant of royal authority from around his neck, holding it thoughtfully in his hand. For the first time since becoming King Alpha, he realized leadership could not survive upon tradition alone. It required the courage to recognize truth even when history resisted it. The guardian turned toward the ancient book. Its pages moved once again until another illustration appeared. This time, it revealed 12 circles surrounding a single silver flame. One circle after another gradually dimmed until only the final light remained. Beneath the image, elegant writing slowly emerged across the page. The final guardian shall awaken only when compassion opens the path no crown can unlock. Emily quietly touched the silver pendant resting against her heart. The crescent upon its surface glowed brighter than ever before. At the same moment, the ancient pendant answered the symbols carved into the open book. Thin lines of silver light connected them like threads woven across centuries. The elderly priest gasped quietly. That pendant, he whispered. It was never an ordinary keepsake. Nathan looked toward Emily with thoughtful concern rather than surprise. Do you know where it came from? Emily slowly shook her head. My parents left it with me before they disappeared. No one ever knew why they chose the Moon Temple. The guardian gently lowered its head. Because they understood what others had forgotten. They entrusted the final key to the one soul destined to return when remembrance became more important than power. As those words echoed through the sacred chamber, a narrow doorway hidden behind the pedestal quietly opened for the first time. Beyond it stretched a softly illuminated passage leading deeper beneath the mountain. Warm silver light flowed from the unseen corridor, carrying with it the peaceful scent of pine forests after spring rain. Without urgency, without command, the guardian looked toward Emily once more. The sanctuary has remembered your name, it said. Now it is time for you to remember why it has always known yours. Emily Carter stood before the newly opened passage while the silver light flowing from its depths gently reflected across the polished stone floor. Nothing urged her forward except a quiet certainty that had been growing inside her since the first ancient bell echoed across the empire. King Alpha Nathan Blackwood stepped beside her, careful to remain one respectful pace behind, honoring the unseen order that governed the sanctuary. The radiant wolf guardian watched them with calm approval before slowly dissolving into countless shimmering lights that drifted upward like falling stars in reverse. The hidden corridor stretched farther than anyone expected. Its walls were carved with graceful scenes showing generations of wolves guiding children through forests, families rebuilding villages after harsh winters, and leaders placing their hands upon the shoulders of ordinary people rather than standing above them. Emily realized that every carving celebrated compassion instead of conquest. Every memory honored service instead of victory. The deeper they walked, the warmer the silver pendant resting against her heart became until it glowed with the same peaceful light surrounding the passage. Finally, the corridor opened into a magnificent circular hall unlike any chamber they had seen before. At its center rested a crystal basin filled with perfectly still water reflecting the ceiling like a mirror. Above it floated a delicate crown formed entirely from silver light. It was neither metal nor gemstone. It seemed woven from moonlight itself, quietly illuminating the room without casting a single shadow. Around the basin stood 12 empty stone seats arranged in a perfect circle. Nathan slowly studied the ancient symbols carved into each one before recognizing the royal crest of every founding wolf clan. These were never thrones, he whispered with quiet realization. They were places where equals gathered. Emily approached the crystal basin. As she gazed into the silent water, its surface gently rippled without being touched. Instead of her own reflection, she saw countless unfamiliar faces smiling with kindness. Some wore simple clothing, like farmers and healers. Others carried royal cloaks or ceremonial robes. Yet every one of them shared the same peaceful expression. The images slowly blended together until only one remained. A woman wearing the silver crown stood beneath a full moon while extending her hand toward an alpha king. They did not stand above one another. They stood side by side. Nathan quietly watched the vision disappear before looking toward Emily. Our ancestors built an empire believing leadership flowed from strength, he said thoughtfully. Perhaps they forgot that strength was only meant to protect something greater. Emily lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by everything the sanctuary had revealed. I have never wanted power, she answered honestly. I only wanted to help where I could. At that moment, the floating crown descended slowly until it hovered just above her head without touching her. Gentle silver light spread across the chamber, awakening every carved symbol surrounding the hall. A soft voice echoed through the sanctuary once again, calm as the evening breeze through ancient pines. The heart that seeks no throne is the only heart worthy to guard one. Nathan instinctively placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head, not because anyone commanded him, but because truth itself deserved respect. The crystal water became perfectly clear once more, revealing a final image beneath its surface. A narrow silver road stretched beyond the northern mountains toward lands untouched by any map within the empire. Emily felt the quiet invitation once again. The sanctuary had revealed its greatest secret, yet it was also revealing that its true purpose had never been confined within these sacred walls. Their journey was only beginning, and somewhere beyond the distant horizon another forgotten promise was patiently waiting to be remembered. Emily Carter remained standing beside the crystal basin long after the silver road beneath its surface faded from view. The silence inside the hidden chamber felt different now. It no longer carried the weight of forgotten centuries. Instead, it held the quiet expectation of a promise waiting to be fulfilled. King Alpha Nathan Blackwood slowly lifted his eyes toward the floating crown, which continued to hover peacefully above Emily without ever touching her. Neither of them reached for it. Somehow they both understood that the sanctuary was revealing trust rather than offering possession. The elderly priest stepped carefully into the circular hall, his expression filled with humble wonder. For generations we searched for relics, he whispered. But the greatest treasure was never an object. It was the truth we forgot to protect. His words echoed softly beneath the stone ceiling before disappearing into stillness. At that very moment, a deep chime rolled gently through the sanctuary once again. Unlike the first ancient bells, this sound carried warmth instead of mystery. Every glowing symbol carved into the 12 stone seats brightened together before thin streams of silver light rose toward the center of the chamber. They did not gather around the floating crown. They surrounded Emily instead, weaving graceful circles that resembled moonlight dancing across calm water. The light never overwhelmed her. It simply reflected the peaceful rhythm of her heartbeat. Nathan watched the ancient phenomenon with quiet respect. Throughout his life, he had believed a ruler earned recognition through victories, strength, and unwavering authority. Yet every lesson inside the sanctuary revealed a different foundation. Compassion had never been weakness. It had always been the highest form of courage. Slowly he removed the royal signet ring from his hand and placed it upon the edge of the crystal basin. If our history must change, he said softly, then I will allow truth to guide it instead of pride. Emily looked at him with quiet surprise. You would change the traditions of an entire empire? Nathan smiled gently. Traditions exist to preserve wisdom, not to hide it. Before either of them spoke again, the crystal water shimmered once more. This time it revealed countless faces across the empire. Farmers harvesting golden fields, children laughing beneath ancient oak trees, healers caring for weary travelers, craftsmen shaping stone, and families gathered beneath peaceful evening skies. Every life appeared connected by delicate threads of silver light stretching toward the sanctuary. Emily realized the temple had never belonged to kings alone. It had always belonged to everyone whose kindness strengthened the empire one ordinary day at a time. Suddenly, the silver pendant resting against her heart lifted gently into the air. It floated toward the center of the chamber, where the moonlit crown slowly descended to meet it. The moment both touched, they became surrounded by a soft circle of radiant light before separating once again. A new symbol now shimmered upon the pendant, identical to the ancient emblem carved above the sanctuary entrance. The calm voice returned one final time. The key has awakened because the heart remained unchanged. As the words faded, every doorway within the hidden chamber slowly opened at once, allowing warm sunlight to pour inside from passages that had remained sealed for 1,000 years. Nathan looked toward the brilliant light, then toward Emily, understanding that the sanctuary had finished revealing its memories. What remained was no longer a mystery buried beneath stone. It was a future waiting beyond the mountains, where every forgotten promise would now depend upon the choices they made together. Emily Carter slowly walked beside King Alpha Nathan Blackwood as they emerged from the hidden chamber into the great sanctuary once more. Nothing inside the temple appeared exactly as they had first found it. The towering wolf statues no longer seemed like silent monuments forgotten by history. Their crystal eyes now reflected warm silver light that followed every peaceful step Emily took across the ancient stone floor. Even the air itself felt lighter, carrying the fresh scent of mountain pine drifting through passages that had remained sealed for centuries. Outside the sanctuary, the royal guard and temple guardians waited with patient uncertainty. Hours had passed, yet no one had dared cross the sacred threshold without invitation. The moment Emily appeared beneath the enormous archway, every silver symbol carved into the temple walls awakened together. Gentle light spread outward across the mountain cliffs like ripples upon a quiet lake, reaching forests, valleys, and distant villages beyond the horizon. Captain Daniel Brooks watched in silent amazement as the ancient gates remained fully open without resistance for the very first time since arriving. The sanctuary was no longer guarding itself from the world. It was welcoming the future. Nathan slowly stepped onto the broad stone platform before the entrance and turned toward the gathering guards, priests, and elders who had followed the extraordinary events since dawn. None of them spoke. They simply waited for their King Alpha to explain the miracle standing before them. Nathan looked toward Emily before facing the others once more. Everything our ancestors preserved was meant to protect hope, he said calmly. Somewhere along the centuries, we remembered the walls, but forgot the reason they were built. The elderly priest quietly lowered his head. One after another, the temple guardians followed his example. They were not bowing before a title. They were honoring a truth greater than themselves. Emily felt the familiar warmth of the silver pendant resting against her heart. The newly awakened emblem upon its surface glowed softly before answering the countless symbols carved across the sanctuary. Without warning, the floating crown of moonlight appeared once again above the temple entrance. It descended with graceful slowness until it hovered above Emily exactly as it had inside the hidden chamber. No hand reached upward. No voice declared a ceremony. Instead, the crown gently settled upon her head as naturally as morning sunlight touching the mountains. The moment it did, every bell hidden throughout the sanctuary rang together in perfect harmony. Their clear voices rolled across the empire without fear or urgency. Farmers paused in their fields. Children looked toward the northern peaks. Wolves across distant forests quietly lifted their heads beneath the bright afternoon sky. Nathan stepped forward until he stood before Emily. For one brief moment, the entire gathering held its breath. Then, without hesitation or pride, the King Alpha lowered himself onto one knee. His hand rested over his heart as he looked up with complete sincerity. "Today I do not honor a crown," he said softly. "I honor the heart that taught this empire what the crown was always meant to protect." Tears quietly filled the eyes of many who witnessed the moment. Emily gently shook her head, overwhelmed by the respect she had never sought. Yet the sanctuary answered with another wave of peaceful silver light flowing across every stone, every pillar, and every ancient carving. The forgotten promise had finally been fulfilled, not because someone claimed authority, but because kindness had found its rightful place beside leadership, allowing an entire empire to remember that its greatest strength had never been power alone. Emily Carter stood quietly beneath the open sky, while the silver crown rested lightly upon her head. Yet she felt no heavier than she had on the morning she carried flowers through the peaceful halls of the Moon Temple. Around her, the ancient sanctuary seemed to exhale after 1,000 years of patient silence. The glowing symbols carved into every stone slowly softened until they blended naturally with the mountain itself, as though the temple no longer needed miracles to protect its purpose. It had found the heart it had been waiting for. King Alpha Nathan Blackwood rose to his feet and stood beside Emily rather than before her. Neither reached for the other. Neither sought to stand above the other. Together they looked across the endless valleys stretching beyond the northern cliffs, where rivers shimmered beneath the afternoon sun and forests swayed gently in the breeze. The elderly priest slowly approached, carrying the faded scroll that had first spoken of the forgotten sanctuary. As he carefully unrolled the ancient parchment once more, new words gradually appeared beneath the original prophecy, written in flowing silver letters that had remained invisible until this very day. When remembrance returns, the gate shall never again close against a worthy heart. Quiet wonder spread through everyone gathered outside the sanctuary. Captain Daniel Brooks looked toward the great entrance where the enormous stone doors remained peacefully open. Travelers from every pack would one day be able to stand where only legends had existed before. Nathan smiled thoughtfully as he watched ordinary temple guardians and royal soldiers exchange respectful nods instead of cautious suspicion. The invisible distance that had separated them for generations seemed to disappear without anyone commanding it. Emily gently touched the silver pendant resting beside the moonlit crown. The warmth within it had become calm, no longer calling her forward because it had already fulfilled the purpose entrusted to it long ago. She finally understood why her parents had left her at the Moon Temple with nothing except a simple keepsake and quiet hope. They had protected not only their daughter, but also the future of an entire empire. As the afternoon light slowly drifted toward evening, a narrow pathway of silver illumination appeared beyond the sanctuary, extending across distant mountains toward lands untouched by any royal map. Nathan noticed it at the same moment Emily did. "Do you believe another sanctuary waits beyond those peaks?" he asked softly. Emily smiled with peaceful confidence. "I think hope is always waiting somewhere beyond the place where people stop looking." The answer brought a quiet smile to Nathan's face. Behind them, the ancient bells rang one final time, not as a warning and not as a summons, but as a joyful farewell to the long age of silence. High above the sanctuary, a magnificent white wolf emerged among the drifting clouds for only a single heartbeat before dissolving into brilliant moonlit mist. Every person present felt the same quiet certainty settle within their hearts. The greatest legacy left by the ancestors had never been hidden beneath stone walls or guarded by forgotten gates. It had always lived inside simple acts of kindness passed from one generation to the next. Emily and Nathan walked forward together along the newly revealed mountain path, while the sanctuary remained peacefully open behind them, welcoming every future traveler who valued compassion above pride. Far across the empire, children would someday hear the story of the day the forgotten sanctuary awakened, not as a tale about ancient power, but as a reminder that the strongest leaders are those whose hearts remain gentle enough to guide others toward hope. And beneath the quiet glow of the rising moon, the first chapter of a brighter age began at last.